The envelope arrived on Wednesday morning, resting neatly on the doormat, cream-colored with gold embossing catching the sunlight. Something about it made my heart skip a beat. I knew immediately it was from Ezra, even though in the past 5 years, he had called only a handful of times and had never once come to Rockville. I picked it up, feeling the thickness of the paper in my fingers, turning it over, hesitant to open it. A quiet voice inside whispered that whatever was inside could change everything. My name is Crystal Yates. I'm 65, living on a peaceful street in Rockville, in a house I bought 22 years ago. To my neighbors, I'm just a retired accountant, a widow who occasionally helps local businesses with tax returns. No one knows the truth. Not my neighbors, not my friends, and certainly not my only son. I have 9 zeros tucked away in my bank account, a fortune they cannot imagine. Finally, I broke the seal and pulled out the invitation. The paper was thick, the font elegant, ornate. Ezra Yates and Pamela Tramble invite you to celebrate their marriage. My hands trembled as I read it. 3 weeks from now, my son would be married, and I didn't even know the woman he was marrying. A note slipped out of the envelope, written in Ezra's familiar angular handwriting. Mum, I know we haven't seen each other in a long time, but I'm asking you to come. It's important to me. He rarely asked for anything. Even as a child, he had been fiercely independent, probably because he learned early that he couldn't rely on his father. I walked to the window, letting the spring air from my small garden drift in. The apple trees were in bloom, their white petals swirling through the air like snowflakes. My house, my little haven, was perfect in its quiet way. A wooden porch, old floorboards that creaked at night, space enough for books, memories, and me. My Volvo sat in the yard, 10 years old, yet still perfect. I could have driven any car, Bentley, Ferrari, but I didn't want attention. My car was reliable, discreet, exactly what I needed. I placed the invitation on the kitchen table and began making tea. The familiar routine helped me settle my mind. I took my favorite cup, white with delicate blue patterns, a gift from Ezra for my 50th birthday. Back then, he still came home regularly, still shared pieces of his life with me. What did I really know about Pamela, his bride-to-be? Almost nothing. Their last conversation at Christmas mentioned her name and her job in advertising. They met at a conference. That was it. As the kettle boiled, my mind wandered to Ezra's childhood. His father, Brian, had left when Ezra was only 7, packing his bags and disappearing with a note. I'm sorry, but I'm not cut out for family life. Later, I discovered the truth. He had left for a younger woman, a social climb, a shortcut to luxury. Irony, life's cruel twist. He sought wealth while living with someone who already had it, and his own child didn't know. I never told Ezra about my fortune. I wanted him to grow into an independent man, to succeed on his own merit, untouched by money. My wealth had begun with an inheritance from my cousin Archibald Hall, a reclusive bachelor who left me his mansion in Boston and a tidy bank account. Why me? Perhaps because I had listened patiently to his endless stories of travels and ancient civilizations. I sold the mansion as a young woman, invested wisely in oil during the early 90s, and gradually diversified into pharmaceuticals, technology, and real estate. The wealth grew quietly, steadily, like a snowball rolling downhill. And yet, I lived modestly. Simple pleasures, a few quality possessions, quiet travel, and anonymous charity were my markers of life. Ezra grew up, thinking we lived on an accountant's salary and a small inheritance from Uncle Archie. I funded his education quietly, letting him believe it was modest savings. After college, he moved to New York and our relationship became more formal. Calls dwindled from monthly to quarterly. Visits became rare. until they stopped completely. I never blamed him. Life is busy, youth is selfish, and New York is intoxicating. But in the evenings, sometimes longing overwhelmed me. I would drive my Volvo to a small hill on the outskirts of Rockville, look over the city, and wonder at life's strange turns. The kettle's whistle brought me back to the present. Tea in hand, I stared at the invitation again. Ezra was getting married. My boy, my only son, was starting a family. Should I tell him the truth about everything before the wedding, or let it remain hidden? I imagined his reaction. Disbelief, maybe anger. Why didn't you tell me? He might ask. Didn't you trust me? How could I explain my reasons? That I was protecting him. That I wanted him to grow unspoiled by wealth. Any answer would sound like an excuse. The phone rang. I glanced at the screen, Ezra, as if he had read my thoughts. Mom, did you get the invitation? His voice carried a tension I hadn't heard in years. Yes, dear. This morning, I replied. Are you coming? There was something in his tone, excitement, uncertainty. Why did my presence matter so much after all these years of distance? Of course, I said. It's your wedding. Thank you, he exhaled, relief flooding his voice. Pamela really wants to meet you. Me too, I lied, hiding the anxiety that churned inside me at the thought of meeting my future daughter-in-law. Tell me more about her. She's wonderful, Mom. Smart, determined. Works at a big advertising agency. She's done a great job planning our wedding. Everything will be perfect. I listened, picturing Pamela in my mind, imagining a sharp, calculating woman with perfect hair. Maybe I was being unfair. Ezra never had bad taste in women. Where will you live after the wedding? I asked. We found an apartment in Brooklyn, he replied. Not very big, but in a nice neighborhood. We had to take out a 20-year mortgage, though. I bit my lip. I could have bought them a house outright. No loans needed. But how could I explain that without revealing my fortune? No. We'll manage, he said quickly. I don't want to burden you. We spoke a while longer of the weather, his work, travel plans for me. Then he apologized for a meeting, and we said goodbye. I put the phone down and went to the window. The day was clear and bright. Mrs. Higgins across the street tended her garden, her grandson's twins racing around the lawn with their dog. Life looked ordinary, peaceful. Yet inside my bank account, soon, the quarterly investment income would arrive an amount larger than Rockville's annual budget. I started a mental list for the trip. Find the perfect outfit, elegant but modest, not flashy yet refined. Contact Lloyd Brooks, my financial advisor, to manage transactions while I was away. I went to the bedroom closet, sifting through dresses. My silver grey Milan dress from last fall would be perfect, simple, elegant, inconspicuous. I put the dress on the bed and opened an old photo album. Ezra at 3, smiling with a missing front tooth. School photos, Boy Scout uniform, graduation, first job. I flipped to the last printed picture from 6 years ago, Thanksgiving. After that, only digital photos printed but never placed in the album. The phone rang again. This time it was Lloyd. Crystal, how are you? Did you get my report on the latest investments? Lloyd's voice always had a calming effect on me. We met 25 years ago when I was just starting to get serious about investing. He was a young, promising financier, and I was an inexperienced wid with an unexpected inheritance. Over the years, he had become a managing partner at a large investment firm, and I was one of his most wealthy clients. Yes, I got the report. It looks impressive as always. I have some news. Ezra is getting married. Congratulations. His voice was filled with genuine joy. When's the wedding? In 3 weeks in New York. Will you tell him? Lloyd was the only one who understood my doubts about revealing the truth about my fortune. I don't know. Probably not. At least not now. I don't want to spoil his celebration with such news. He might be delighted. It's not every day you find out your mother is a billionaire orangry that. I've kept it from him for so many years. Will start seeing me differently, or his fiancé. I understand. Lloyd interrupted me. It's up to you. But maybe it's time to stop hiding. Youts of to live openly. I sighed. We had discussed this before. Lloyd always thought I was too cautious, that my fears were exaggerated. I'll think about it. In the meantime, I need you to check those transactions we talked about. We discussed a few more business matters, and I hung up. I spent the evening sorting through documents and planning my trip. I decided to take the train. The plane was faster, but I liked watching the changing scenery outside the window. That night, I dreamed about Ezra. Small, frightened, lost in a Hugo supermarket. I searched for him, making my way through endless rows of goods, hearing him cry. But I couldn't find him. I woke up in a cold sweat with uneasy feeling. The upcoming wedding made me feel strangely anxious. Something told me that this trip would change everything. Perhaps the moment of truth had arrived. Or perhaps it was. Time to lose my son for good. I didn't know the answer, but I was sure that feuding invitation was an invitation to disaster. New York greeted me with typical mid-May weather, variable clouds and gusty winds. Stepping out of their station building, I was momentarily lost in the rush of people. It had been more than 3 years since my last visit, and the city seemed even more noisy and chaotic. Mom. I turned around and saw Ezra. He looked good. Tanned, fit, wearing a stylish grey suit. Standing next to him was a tall blonde with perfect hair and an attentive gaze. Pamela, no doubt. Finally, Ezra hugged me. You haven't changed. That was a lie. Of course. The last few years had left their mark. New wrinkles, silver strands in my dark hair. But I appreciated the compliment. You look great, I said, turning to his companion. You must be Pamela. It's very nice to meet you. She smiled, a professional practice smile that didn't reach her eyes. Likewise, Mrs. Yates. Ezra has told me so much about you. Her voice was melodious, but with a barely perceptible note of condescension. She glanced at my outfit. A simple dress and cardigan, comfortable for traveling. And something flashed in her eyes. Disappointment, contempt. I hope it's only good. Sighed, feeling slightly uncomfortable under her searching gaze. Let's go. The car is waiting, Ezra said, picking up my suitcase. We booked you a hotel room near our apartment. You can rest after your trip. On the way to the car, Pamela stayed a little behind us, typing something intently on her phone. I took the opportunity to quietly ask my son, "How did you two meet at a digital marketing conference?" He smiled at the memory. I was representing our company, and Pamela was one of the speakers. She blew the audience away with her presentation. Then we got talking at the after-party, and well, things just took off from there. How long have you been together? A little over a year. I know it seems like a quick decision to some people, but when you meet the right person, you just know. You understand. I nodded, though I didn't really understand. My marriage to Brian had been the result of a long 5-year relationship, and it still ended in disaster. We approached a black Lexus with tinted windows. Ezra opened the front door for Pamela, then helped mine tow the back seat. Sorry it's so cramped, Mom, but it's not far. 20 minutes if there's no traffic. Pamela looked up from her phone and turned to me. How was your trip, Mrs. Yates? That train is so nostalgic. I'd prefer flying. It saves a lot of time. I like watching scenery, I replied. Age allows you to take your time. Of course. She smiled again with her perfect smile. When you retire, you have a lot of time. There was no direct rudeness in her tone, but I felt a slight sting. She probably imagined me as some old-fashioned retiree living in the last century. If only she knew that I earned more in a day than she did in a year. But I pushed the thought away. Such pride was unworthy of me. What do you do in advertising, Pamela? I asked, trying to keep the conversation going. I'm a creative director at Bloom Advertising. We work with some of the biggest brands in the country. You may have seen our campaign for Stella Vita, a premium cosmetics line. I had seen it and ever announced some shares in the company that made the cosmetics, but I kept that to myself. That sounds impressive. It really is. Ezra chimed in from the back seat. Pamela won 2 awards for that campaign. She's a true professional. Pamela smiled sweetly, clearly accustomed to compliments. In advertising, it's all about connections and making an impression, she said, glancing at me quickly in the rear view mirror. What about you, Mrs. Yates? Ezra mentioned that you're an accountant. Again, that tone as if she were talking about something unprecious, outdated. Yes, I used to be an accountant in Rockville. I'm retired now, but I sometimes consult for local businesses. How lovely, she said, and I noticed Ezra went slightly at her condescending tone. But he said nothing, just focused on the road. The rest of trip was spent in tense silence. I looked out the window at the skyscrapers rushing by, and thought that my first impression of Pamela was even worse than he had feared. Ambitious, self-assured, and seemingly dismissive of me as a harmless small-town girl not worth her attention. The hotel where I was staying turned out to be a decent mid-range establishment in Chelsea. Ezra helped carry my suitcase to my room. I need to go back to the office for a couple of hours, he said when we were alone. Pamela went to her final dress. Fitting. Do you mind relaxing? We have a rehearsal dinner tonight. I'll pick you up at 7. Sure, go ahead. I smiled. I really need to relax a little after the trip. He kissed me on the cheek and left. And I sank into a chair, feeling tired, not so much from the trip as from meeting my future sister-in-law for the first time. Pamela was exactly as I had imagined her, calculating and arrogant. But what really bothered me was the way Ezra looked at her, with adoration, as if she were the center of his universe. He didn't notice her condescending attitude toward me, or he chose to ignore it. I unpacked my things, took a shower, and lay down for a nap, setting the alarm for 6 o'clock. When I woke up, I spent a long time choosing an outfit for the evening. I settled on a dark blue suit with a silver brooch, elegant enough for a rehearsal dinner, but not overly formal. Ezra picked me up at 7 sharp. He looked a little tired, but excited. You'll meet Pamela's parents just in time, he said as we drove to the restaurant. They flew in from Boston this afternoon. What are they like? Nice people. Her father, Hamish Tramble, owns a chain of building supply stores. Her mother, Olivia, runs some kind of charity. They're a little conservative, but they love Pamela very much. I nodded, wondering if they knew their daughter's true nature, or if she only showed them the version of herself they wanted to see. The restaurant turned out to be a trendy place with signature cuisine. Inside, about 20 people had already gathered, close friends and relatives of the bride and groom. Pamela stood in the center of a small group, talking animatedly and laughing loudly from time to time. She was wearing an intricately tailored beige dress that I was sure cost at least several thousand. Noticing us, she interrupted her conversation and approached us with a forced smile. There you are, Mom. Dad, she said, turning to a middle-aged couple standing nearby. This is Mrs. Yates, Ezra's mother. Hamish Tramble turned out to be a stocky man with greying temples and a firm handshake. His wife Olivia, a delicate woman with immaculate hair, very similar to her daughter, gave me a measuring look. "Niceto meet you," she said in a tone that betrayed a hint of disappointment. Clearly, I had not made a good impression on her. "Likewise," I replied calmly, accustomed to such assessments. "Mrs. Yates, I understand you're from Rockville," Hamish inquired. "Nice town." "I have a couple of shops there." "Yes, it's a cozy place. It must be a big change for you moving from such a quiet town to New York," Olivia interjected with a slight smile. "I hope the noise of their big city isn't too tiring for you." "I lived in New York when I was younger," I replied. "The city has changed, but I'm familiar with its rhythm." Olivia looked slightly surprised, as if she hadn't expected a provincial accountant to have such a past. "Really? Pamela didn't mention that." "My mother lived here before I was born," Ezra interjected. "Then we moved to Rockville." "I see," Olivia said, clearly losing interest in the subject. Pamela took Ezra by the arm. "Darling, you must introduce your mother to Jenna and Ryan. They just arrived." It was an obvious ploy to get them away from our conversation. Ezra didn't seem to notice and willingly followed her, leaving me with her parents. "How long have you been retired, Mrs. Yates?" Hamish asked, filling the glasses with champagne. "Officially about 5 years, but I still consult for a few clients." "Accounting is such a stable profession," Olivia remarked. "Pamela always wanted a more creative career. She stood out for her abilities from an early age." I nodded, not wanting to get into a debate about the merits of different professions. "You have a wonderful daughter." It wasn't an outright lie. Pamela was undoubtedly smart and ambitious. It was just that her personality left something to be desired. The conversation was becoming increasingly awkward, and I was glad when it was announced that it was time to sit down at the table. I was seated between Ezra's friend, whose name immediately forgot, and an elderly lady who turned out to be Pamela's aunt. Dinner followed the standard script for such events. Toasts, laughter, memorious of how the young couple had met. Pamela, shown as she recounted the story of their first meeting with such artistry that even I, knowing the truth from Ezra, almost believed her version of events. I watched my son sitting next to her. He looked at her adoringly, never taking high sighs off her, as if she were the only source of light in the room. Once upon a time, Brian used to look at me that way. The memory brought back a dull ache. At tone point, I caught Pamela's searching gaze. She whispered something to her friend sitting next to her, and they both laughed softly, glancing in my direction. I pretended not to notice, focusing on my dessert. "Mrs. Yates," Pamela said across the table when the coffee was served. Ezra said, "You're planning to stay until the end of the week after the wedding. I hope you won't be bored in the hotel while we're on our honeymoon." Her tone was polite, but her words sounded like a hint that I might be a burden. "Don't worry, I'll find something to do," I replied calmly. "There's always something to see in New York." "Of course," she smiled. "If you need anything, Mimother will be happy to help." "Right, Mom?" Olivia forced a smile that clearly said that help from her provincial mother-in-law was not part of her plans. "Of course, dear." I felt tired from the fake politeness and forced smiles. "Excuse me," I said, and went out into the restaurant lobby to take a break from the noise and tension. Leaning on the railing of a small balcony overlooking the street, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. New York was bustling and sparkling with lights, indifferent to my worries. "Crystal, it can't be." I turned at the familiar voice and saw Lloyd Brooks coming out of the restaurant. "Lloyd, what are you doing here?" He smiled as he approached. "Business dinner with clients in the next room. I saw you when I was walking by." "Are you at your son's wedding?" "Just their rehearsal dinner. The wedding is the day after tomorrow." Lloyd looked good, fit, with a touch of grey at his temples, wearing an impeccable suit. The years had added dignity, but not age. What do you think of your future daughter-in-law? He asked, leaning against the railing next to me. I sighed. To be honest, I'm not thrilled. She's arrogant. And she seems to think I'm a worthless old woman. She doesn't know who she's dealing with. Lloyd smiled. I bet she'd change her tune if she knew about your assets. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. I don't want people to treat me differently because of money. You haven't told Ezra? No. And looking at his fiancée, I think I made the right decision. She'd instantly switch her attention from him to me and my wealth. Lloyd shook his head. Not all people are like that, Crystal. Perhaps you underestimate your son and his choice. Maybe. But I see how she looks at me with barely concealed contempt, and how she manipulates Ezra. He's like us under a spell. He can't see anything but her. Love is often blind, Lloyd remarked. But it passes. I'm afraid by the time it passes, it will be too late. The balcony door opened and Ezra appeared looking worried. Mum, there you are. I was looking for you. He noticed. Lloyd. Hello, Ezra. This is Lloyd Brooks, an old friend of mine. I introduced him. Lloyd, this is my son Ezra. They shook hands. Nice to meet you, Lloyd said. Congratulations on your upcoming wedding. Thank you, Ezra said, looking slightly puzzled. Mum never mentioned you. We met many years ago when your mother was consulting for my company on tax issues. Lloyd leads smoothly. We've stayed in touch ever since. Ezra nodded, accepting the explanation. Pamela would like to discuss the details of tomorrow with you, Mom. Would you mind coming back to the table? Of course, I said, turning to Lloyd. It was nice to meet you. Likewise, he said, handing me his business card. Give me a call if you have time before you leave. I could show you my new office. I took the card, realizing that he was offering to meet. To discuss the situation in more detail, I will. When Ezra and I returned to the hall, Pamela was already telling the guests about her wedding dress, deliberately leaving out the details to keep the element of surprise. Ah, there you are. She smiled at us. Mrs. Yates, I was just talking about tomorrow's rehearsals. You need to be at the church by 2:00. I hope that's not too early for you. Not at all, I replied, ignoring yet another hint about my age. Wonderful, Ezra. Dear, will you make sure your mother gets to the church on time? She may have trouble finding her way around town. Of course, I'll pick her up. Ezra nodded, not noticing his fiance's condescending tone. I watched their interaction with growing concern. Pamela skillfully guided every conversation, every decision, and Ezra willingly followed her instructions. It was an unhealthy dynamic, but I knew that any interference on my part would only push my son away. The evening was coming to an end, and the guests began to leave. Ezra offered to drive me back to the hotel, but I insisted on a taxi, seeing how Pamela was glancing impatiently at her watch. See you tomorrow, dear. I kissed him on the cheek. It was nice to meet everyone. See you tomorrow, Mrs. Yates. Pamela gave me another one of her perfect smiles. I hope you get some rest. In the taxi, I took out Lloyd's business card. On the back, he had scribbled, "Breakfast at 8, Bristol Cafe, on the corner of your hotel. We need to talk." I put the card in my bag, thinking about the evening. Pamela turned out to be even worse than I had expected. Calculating, manipulative, with a clear contempt for people she considered inferior to herself. Ezra, my intelligent, sensible son, seemed oblivious to her true nature, blinded by her beauty and charisma. When I got back to my room, I called Lloyd to confirm a meeting. The conversation was brief. We both understood the need to discuss situation in person. As I fell asleep, I thought about how I had to remain neutral for my son's happiness, even if I thought his choice was wrong. After all, It was his life and his decisions. But something told me that silence could lead to even bigger troubles. I also thought about how Pamela's behavior would change if she found out about my true financial situation. The thought brought a bitter smile to my lips. Her reaction would. So predictable, but I decided not to reveal my secret. At least not yet. Let